So, I've been doing a little experiment over the last year and a half. Well, actually, 6 years, but who's counting? And I think it's interesting enough to warrant a brief powwow. After 6 years of not only surviving, but thriving off of a plant based way of eating, I incorporated some strategic, high quality animal products into the equation, wanting to explore if I could improve and, dare I say, optimize key subjective and objective markers of health and vitality, from how I feel to how I sleep, physically perform, and finally what it would do to the 50 plus biomarkers that I get tested twice a year. I know, a lot of question marks, and there were a few interesting and eye-opening moves in the data, which ultimately made me modify my strategy. So, let's take a look. Yo, what is up? Welcome back to another week of How to Health. My name is Kevin. I run liftinbalance.com, where we take aim at all things health and longevity and do it in an odd, weird, interesting, and highly sarcastic way. Today, we are talking about my N of 1 experience from switching up my eating for longevity strategy, comparing my experience with plant-based and animal incorporated ways of eating. And I'll explain that terminology in just a minute. But first, I want to tell you what made this experiment even more interesting, at least for me. And it's the fact that basically every other lifestyle variable stayed consistent over the 3-year window that we will be analyzing. I'm talking exercise routine, meal timing, sleep schedule, work life, and overall environment. All of the main interventions which tend to muddy the waters while attempting to tease out what was the driving factor for an observed change were consistent, leaving the single lever of food type as the main suspect swaying the data, or not swaying the data. Now, before we get into the weeds, it's important to remind you that this is nothing more than my own experience, and your experience could be totally different, as there are a lot of different variables that play into an individual's biological response to lifestyle change, making many people's experience quite unique. That's why most of our good clinical data comes from large-scale, properly controlled randomized control trials to tease these things out at the societal levels, which is not what I did. This was just me, myself, and Irene. I. Good news is, I've been tracking a lot of things for a long time. So let's get into it, beginning with what I was actually eating. During the last 5 years or so, I have been following a strict early time-restricted feeding protocol, meaning I ate all of my meals earlier in the day, between the hours of 9 a.m. and 3 p.m., and then fasting for 18 hours until the ceremonial breaking of the fast the next day. I won't get into the exact longevity-based reasons that I do this now, because we have other things to talk about, and we already break it down in this video here. What's important for the context of this video is that this practice was established long ago and consistent through the plant-based and animal incorporated eating. With that backdrop, what exactly did I eat? Well, you'll be surprised to hear that during the plant-based stint, the high-volume foods were beans, legumes, fruits, and veggies, usually consisting of a big daily dose of what I like to call the big nourishing mess, or 20 to 30 plant-based ingredients and spices all concocted into a Tex-Mex Chipotle-like organic beast of a bowl. Yeah. You can see how this life grew on me. This was my status quo for a good 6 years, and to be honest, I never got sick of it. In fact, I still eat it today, which we'll talk about in just a minute. Now, in the beginning of 2022, I started this animal incorporated experiment, adding some wild venison, grass-fed bison, and organic free-range eggs into the equation, typically cooking on the grill or in a pan using grass-fed bison tallow. I would eat the meat 4 days a week, starting and ending the day with a high-protein scramble of a meat, some eggs, and a whole bunch of veggies. Now, I want to note some important parts of this protocol. I only ate meat 4 days a week, Tuesday through Friday, and followed a plant-based plus eggs protocol Saturday, Sunday, and Monday. And throughout all this, I still enjoyed a ton of fruits, veggies, and the big nourishing mess. So this was not an animal-based diet. It was simply just incorporating some high-quality animal-based products into the mix and toning down the bean bow party just a bit. And like I said before, but I will reiterate again, all other aspects of my life remained rather consistent. With that, what were some of my observations? Starting with overall feel, which is highly subjective, might I add. Here's where I was sad and happy all at the same time, because I really didn't notice any difference in mood, feel, cognition, and physical function. I felt great once I settled into a plant-based way of eating, and that pretty much continued as I added the aforementioned strategic animal products, solidifying my biased, but now backed by my own personal data, way of thinking that if you focus on high-quality real whole foods, whether they be animal-based, plant-based, or somewhere in the middle, doing your eating in a strategic feeding window focused during the daylight hours, aka circadian eating, you're going to reap the benefits of efficient cellular operations, along with its byproduct of feeling good. Now, just so you know, eating healthy but dogging it on sleep, movement, and nature will not save you from the chronic, cranky, tired monster. There is no single silver bullet. Optimizing you takes a holistic approach. And since all of those factors remained consistently good for me, I was able to really analyze the diet-associated changes. Now, one thing I did notice was a slight change in body mass, specifically an uptick in muscle tissue. This wasn't officially confirmed with DEXA scans, but instead astutely observed by the oh-so-thorough Flex-In Mirror analysis. And I would attribute this to a significant increase in daily protein consumption, going from around 0.7 grams per pound of body weight a day to around 1 gram per pound, while also eating foods with a different, and some would argue more anabolic, amino acid profile. So that was definitely an interesting observation. Now we start getting to the cold hard data, as one of the other aspects that I tracked through all of this was sleep, courtesy of the Oura Ring. So when I look back to my trends from 2021 to present day, there was no noticeable shift in my key rest and recovery metrics, including total sleep, sleep latency, sleep stages, resting heart rate, core body temperature, respiration rate, and heart rate variability. And I attribute this to a well-established, consistent sleep hygiene protocol, one crafted over the course of years, which we break down in this video here, and all across the How to Sleep playlist, thus far bringing us to a very unexciting 042 in noticeable changes. And we might as well add to the nothing burger, as my overall perceived energy levels and physical performance remain consistent, with no noticeable impact to my daily strength and functional training, especially since I prefer working out early and fasted. Now, as mentioned, things begin to get interesting as we get to the blood biomarkers, as there were some key changes which not only made me double take, but ultimately made me shift my entire strategy. But let's start with what didn't change first. Looking through my comprehensive blood panels from fall 2021 to present day fall 2023, fasting glucose stayed at a consistent level, hemoglobin H1C did very much the same, C-reactive protein and assay for inflammation remained at near untraceable levels, liver enzymes ATL and ALS remained at consistent good levels, and thyroid stimulating hormone remained cool, calm, and collective, indicating no major shifts in a lot of my core metabolic function as a result of the eating change. That being said, the all-telling lipid panel had a different story, and specifically the extra best of breed granular tests, apolipoprotein B, and fractional NMR, which ended up triggering some red flags. And as we get into this, it is important to understand some lesser known facts about the lipid panels that most doctors run. They're a tad bit deceiving, to say the least, because two key measurements, low density lipoprotein and high density lipoprotein, are not direct. They're calculated. In addition, it does not measure total particle count, only total cholesterol on the particles in the sample, which ultimately poses the risk of not telling the real story. So if you want direct numbers, you have to request the additional tests. And one of the most telling in assessing overall cardiovascular risk, as we discuss here, is the apolipoprotein B test, which is essentially the count of lipoprotein particles that have a high likelihood of being atherogenic, or particles that have a higher prevalence of getting under the endothelial blood vessel walls. So this test to date gives you some of the best visibility that you can get into your overall risk. And of course, it's not standard practice to run it, so ask for it. And although it's still only a piece of the puzzle, it's a crucial one. So this is where the eye-opening observation happened for me, as I saw this traditionally low number shoot up into some high ranges as a result of eating grass-fed, high-quality red meat on a consistent basis. And this number was backed up each time by the fractional NMR test, which provides a direct breakdown of the cholesterol particle size and count. This was the story from the multiple blood draws that I had while following this way of eating, all while HDL remained consistent and triglycerides only slightly elevated. So in light of this information, I did something that any astute longevity enthusiast would do. No, not hop in an ice bath. Although that's, back on track. After consistently elevated tests a year apart, I adjusted. I cut out the meat, kept the eggs, and transitioned to a wild cod and salmon alternative. Everything else staying the same. And you won't even begin to believe what happened. Just like that, in a full panel done 2 months later, ApoB and other elevated cholesterol-based markers shot right back down to their previous plant-based levels. Quite interesting, no? So, does this actually mean anything? And if so, what's the plan moving forward? Starting with the first question, it is really quite a tough one to answer for anyone other than myself. It certainly meant something for me, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it will mean something for you. And who's to say that the elevated numbers that I saw during my experiment would actually be a true risk to my cardiovascular health over time, especially since a lot of my other biomarkers, including the ones for metabolic health and inflammation, were great. It ultimately comes down to your personal risk tolerance and knowing the risk that chronically elevated ApoB poses on longevity, a topic we discussed in that aforementioned video, which will be in the show notes below, is something that I personally would rather not risk, especially knowing that cardiovascular disease is the #1 killer for us modern intelligent walking apes as we accrue chronological years on this beautiful floating rock. So moving forward, I will be monitoring how my body continues to respond to the sustainable wild pescatarian life while I ponder my next potential experiment. And I urge you to do the same. Not follow exactly what I do, but become a practitioner of your well-being, assessing and observing the byproducts of your habits, asking yourself if you are leaving feeling good on the table each and every day. Because if you're walking around tired, lethargic, low energy, sore, achy, depressed more days than not, you likely are. And it's important to understand that is not the default human state. It's a byproduct of living a lifestyle in accordance with modern day societal norms. Norms that you can rebel against, taking back control of your most valuable asset as a result. So re-grab the reins and start gathering some subjective and objective data. Be your own N of 1 experiment and start deploying meaningful change in a safe and sustainable way. Because the status quo of dysfunction, disease, and feeling like shit is something that none of us should be accepting while vitality sits on the other side of owning it. If you have any questions on what we just discussed, drop them in the comments below and get ice bathing already. I mean, owning it already. Sorry about that. Cold shock proteins make you say the damnedest things, huh?